Hi guys. So if you're starting a new pro touring build, you're going to look at a bunch of cars and you're going to try to decide, or what do I want to be the foundation of my pro touring build? One of the questions that might come up is, should I do a unibody car or should I do a body on frame? Those are two pretty different constructions. And I wanted to talk about that today. As you may know, by the mid 80s, all sports cars pretty much went unibody. Even in the classic realm, if you look at, your early, even for the first model Mustang, first model Camaro, those were unibody as well. But at the same time, we know that at the upper level of racing, those are all tube chassis cars. So you have to wonder, if the unibody is so great, why aren't those guys running one? So one thing to keep in mind when you're just trying to decide between a unibody and a body on frame car is that it's not like you can choose the same car. It's not like you can choose a Camaro that's unibody versus a Camaro versus body on frame, or the same thing with a Mustang. So what happens is it's a package deal. So you're choosing between a Camaro, let's say a 1969 Camaro, 108-inch wheelbase. Then you've got a Chevelle, which is body on frame. So you got the unibody Camaro versus the Chevelle, same year, body on frame. Chevelle's the midsize. It's a 112-inch wheelbase. And you're definitely talking about at least a couple £100 difference between the two. So it's very difficult. It's actually very difficult to compare the two. I do want to say that. Now that said, there's just so much to think about because these things are package deals. You've got wheelbase, weight distribution, suspension design. They're all going to have a vast effect on handling, regardless of whether it's unibody or if it's body on frame. The A bodies, a Chevelle, 68 Chevelle or a 69 Chevelle, that's a coil spring car, front and rear, versus, even though it's a body on frame, versus the Camaro, which is a leaf spring car, even though it's a unibody. So just two very different things going on in the rear suspension there. And you're trying to compare these two. And to take that even a step further, let's look at a mid-year Corvette, okay? Like Brian Hoby's 65, right? Car won the Optima Ultimate Street Car Invitational. Meanwhile, that car is actually a body on frame, if you did not know that. So yeah, mid-year Corvettes up until I think it was the C4 was the first time they went to unibody. But the C3, C2, first generation, they're all body on frame with a transverse leaf spring. Now, those things have a transverse leaf spring. Let's rewind back to a second to the mid-year to a 65 Corvette. 98-inch wheelbase, 3,300 pounds. Now let's look at a 2019 Challenger. 2019 Challenger, as we all know, is a pretty large car. 116-inch wheelbase. They weigh in like an RT model weighs about 4,200 pounds. So vastly different setups. Vastly different between the two. Now that said, Challenger is IRS and the Corvette is IRS. So even though they have similar suspension styles, they're completely different cars. So you're trying to compare the two, and it's almost an impossible thing to do. That said, we will go over a couple of points here. I will share with you when you are considering, when you're thinking about this, a unibody versus a body on frame, because I do think it is an interesting concept. But like I said, it's hard. It's very difficult if you're trying to make that a deciding factor between your next pro touring build. So let's go through those. Let's start with the unibody. We'll go through some of the attributes of the unibody before we go into a body on frame. So unibody, it's lighter and more rigid from the factory. It's cheaper and easier to reinforce with subframe connectors. Some will even connect a front and rear subframe to have the best of both world scenarios. And on the downside, the body structure will decay over time. I mean, these are 40, 50-year-old cars. They're going to rust and rot over time. That can be problematic for repair. And it's going to weaken the structure in which it's supposed to be distributing this load, right? And then racing can further wear out the suspension mounting points. No better example than a Fox body Mustang. Obviously, that's a unibody. The torque box is notorious. The torque box is where the upper control arms mount. Notorious for those that want to basically rip loose of the body over time through racing. Also a negative, upgrading to a more modern suspension design requires, the work is a lot more involved. If you want to take a first gen Camaro or Firebird and convert it to a 4-link or something like that from, its leaf spring style rear suspension, it's a little bit more of an undertaking than, a Chevelle where you're literally just swapping the chassis in and out. So moving on to a body on frame. Modular design, it's not dependent on the body for rigidity, so you can focus on just the frame. It has the potential to ride better by isolating vibration from the body. Aftermarket frames allow you to bolt in completely modern suspension geometry and steering. That's a huge one. On the downside, aftermarket frames can be costly. And properly enforcing a stock frame requires a lot of fabrication skills, and it's going to add some weight to the car. And if it's not done properly, obviously it's going to provide very little benefit. And then finally, the body on frame is inherently heavier, and it's not going to distribute the force among the entire body. All the force is just going to be in that frame, and then you're reliant on the frame rails itself, as well as its lateral reinforcements to create that torsional stiffness. So the one question you may be asking yourself is, can you make a body on frame handle as well as a unibody, right? We know the unibody has that advantage with stiffness. Can you make a body on frame equally or as good or better? So all things being equal, you can actually make your body on frame handle the same or better than a unibody. How do I know this? Trans Am, NASCAR, they all run on tube chassis. The key for those guys is you're tying your roll cage to the frame, and then you're having all the same benefits as a unibody. So now you're distributing that load throughout all of the tubing in the car. Now, even if you aren't willing to go that far, aftermarket frames, they're box or tubular, they've got additional reinforcements. They're going to be lighter and stronger than OEM. Some even will utilize an independent rear suspension, which is like the holy grail for handling. Now, if you have a unibody, how do you stay ahead of the curve? That's a natural question. It's going to come in that progression if you're a unibody guy. Now, the good news is the aftermarket comes to the rescue here. You look at Art Morrison, Schwartz, Detroit Speed, just to name a few. There's quite a few out there, but those are just a few. Some of them are making a full chassis for unibody cars. Literally, the whole chassis just bolts up underneath the car, and then you get really the best of both worlds. Others are doing a complete front subframe and then a complete rear subframe, and then they're using a subframe connector to connect the two, which is almost the same exact thing. It's just a little bit more modular. Now, of course, there are options out there that do exist to build a tube chassis. That's what Big Red has. Everyone knows the Big Red Camaro. That's what that car is running, and that's certainly an option if you have a unibody. All right, that about does it for today. I'd love to hear what your comments or questions are down below. If there's another topic you want me to cover, definitely let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks a lot.